welcome to our last City Forum event of the year. So we close the series with a really important and crucial topic, and that is the severe underrepresentation of African American, Hispanic, Latino professionals in planning and architecture. And this is not a controversial statement. Survey after survey after survey has shown a severe degree or a severe diversity gap in our professions. So today we have a terrific panel that are going to sort of try to discuss and kind of unpack some of the issues associated with this problem. You know, when you think about it, think about the John Chase exhibit next door. John Chase, first graduate from the University of Texas, 1952. The university was founded in 1883. And so for 60 plus years, African Americans were not allowed, period, to attend a public university funded by the taxpayers of Texas, among whom were African American citizens and African American taxpayers. Now, these days a conservative would probably call that a taking, because just on one level, they're paying taxes to support public university, yet they couldn't access the services. So that's just one, you know, sort of point of reference. I think it's important to understand the historical point of reference. So I'm going to turn it over to Charles Lewis, who's our Assistant Dean for Students, and he's going to lead the panel, which includes Caleb Roberts, who's a very recent alumni, graduate of the CRP program, and he's now working for Texas Low-Income Housing Information Services, doing affordable housing community organizing in North and West Texas, and Dr. Miriam Solis, who is a faculty member who teaches, you know, her research focuses on equity in terms of infrastructure in cities, but she also teaches research design and theory courses, including theories of race inclusion. So I'll turn it over to Charles Lewis.
Thank you, sir. You know, it's funny. This is, you know, we're going to treat this like a family reunion, right? You guys have some overlap. You guys have some interesting connectivity, particularly with your, you know, it seems like Caleb, you were always here, never to leave, but you have left, extricated yourself into the professional world, which I think you have some really good insight in regards to being here. I'm particularly interested in your story and what brought you here. But also, Miriam was introduced to the school when you were being recruited as a faculty member, and Caleb was, you know, was one of the, you know, I don't know if he was technically a host or not, but you guys have a relationship in that regard. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your relationship, you know, as a student, as a faculty member, as a new faculty member, as an outgoing student, just to give a little bit of background for everyone.
I'll start with that?
Okay. Sure.
So how I got to UT, to start with that, right? So graduated undergrad from Milwaukee, Wisconsin originally. So graduated undergrad from University of Wisconsin La Crosse, right on the Mississippi, on the west side of Wisconsin, and went back home to do community organizing because I didn't want to make any money. But you know, I was a community organizer for a year, about a year and a half in Milwaukee, and working on transit and stopping highway expansions. And I just run into a lot of planners with a lot of numbers, and always talking about like car count traffic, and I don't know what this is. And but it was really helpful in terms of organizing because they had all of the tools. When you go talk to a community, tell them, you know, this is what's going to happen to your community. This is the environmental effect. This is going to happen to your businesses, to the amount of taxes that you're paying. And I just thought that was really cool, and wish I would have had some of that information to do better organizing. Because, man, there's a lot of things that I feel like I did wrong, that if I've known more, that I would have been able to steer in a better direction. So decided to go into planning school. And
Did you have any idea what that meant?
No, no,
Okay, all right.
not at all. Like, I knew some planners, but I had no idea the depth of planning. And just knew that they would help, the information would help what I was trying to do, and hopefully I can find my way into that.
Well, and before you go on, something we're going to circle back to later regarding sort of the community, you mentioned community organizing, but I'm kind of curious as to the planners that you encountered as a community organizer, did they look like you?
Oh,
No, all right.
no, not at all. So this is in, the planners I knew are from Madison, Wisconsin, so real, kind of like Austin.
Careful, careful.
You get the vibes. The vibes are similar. But they were, you know, real hippie guys, you know, they just really cared about these issues, but, you know, never in my life had I believed I met a planner before that. I think that was my first time in like a whole new universe. And so coming here, trying to mix the things that I was doing before with this unknown planning, you know, got kind of messy at some times. Trying to find your way within that in such a broad subject was really difficult. And I was doing work with Dr. Oden at the time when I first got here, trying to talk about diversity and inclusion and racism when I first got to campus, and trying to mend all these things was a real task. Just having conversations with my cohort about things, and luckily we were able to do some things like help influence the process of the hires we're going to get for our faculty. And that was one of the things that led up to something that made it feel tangible, that made it feel like you can find your way and get to some solutions, because we were able to speak out about some of the things that would help us, you know, get forward in our careers and throughout school. So it was really cool to be a part of that, to see you here. Like, it's not just, oh, we're gonna have people come. It's like someone's here in the space, doing the work that, you know, we all talked about wanting to have as a part of our curriculum. So it's really a pleasure to you know, to start it, see it from there, to have you here, and knowing that someone's continuing on, you know, the conversations and helping students figure these things out. So.
Well, it's a nice segue. What many might not realize is that your position is very specific to an initiative regarding race and gender in the built environment. And so you're the first sort of, we have rotating fellows under that agenda, that initiative, but you're the first professor, tenure track to be anointed under that initiative. So what are your thoughts about what attracted you here, what brought you here? And we're going to circle back to you about why you, I mean, there would inevitably be a short list of some kind, but why you ended up here as well. But your initial thoughts about being here and being recruited to come here?
Sure. So I think a lot about how the process that brought me here is oftentimes contains the word special when it's talked about, right? I'm part of a special initiative. And I think about that often because I think about it in the context of the work that's been done to create opportunities, to expand the discussions within our field, but also the relevancy of our field for the future of this country. And so it's a legacy that was carried by students, that was led by students, that I try to honor every day and that I think about every day. Because oftentimes what happens with initiatives like the ones that I'm a part of is they become tokenized. Oh, we are doing something special. We're doing a special initiative without building the kind of institutional support required for my positions like mine to be impactful, for them to be meaningful. For me to feel like I'm contributing to the goals and objectives that were laid out in the position that was created and that I ultimately began. And so the task at hand is to constantly be aware that I'm a part of a community that certainly consists of people of color, but because of the history of institutional racism, it wasn't just people of color who made sure that this initiative happened. It required their involvement. It required their push. But it's a broader community of people who recognizes that the fields must change with the time. And as visionaries of the future, as literally builders of the future, we must be proactively thinking about how to make sure that we're changing with those times. And so I think a lot about my position as being a part of a bigger legacy, both in the School of Architecture and within the planning field more broadly. Similarly, my young professional experience has been very formative for me. I began as an ethnic studies and human geography double major. A lot of critical theory, a lot of critical analysis. But at the same time, because of my personal experiences, I was participating in statewide organizing campaigns on access to higher education. I was heavily involved, and although I didn't know this at the time, but that was leadership development. I was learning how to work plan, I was learning how to build initiatives, how to think through initiatives. And so it was actually through a critical planning course that I took in undergrad that I came to understand that this could be a field for me. This could be a field where I was able to combine my critical theory, my critical analysis with the kind of applied work that I wanted to pursue. And so that's what I talked a lot about when I came for my job visit, and that's the kind of work that I hope to continue here today.
Okay, look, and Mary as well, I have the benefit of having a long-standing relationship with the school. I've done an undergrad here, been here teaching for a bit. So, I sort of have a lay of the land to some extent, but I'm curious as to when you were looking at schools, what drew you here? It wasn't like you looked at UT and said, man, my God, that's such a diverse environment.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to be honest about this one. So it's a little bit.
It is the best policy.
Yeah. So the story, one is that my sister lived in Houston for some time, about a year and a half, and told me Austin was a great place. She was like, oh, you would love Austin. She never came to Austin, but she heard it. So my extensive research to your question was looking online for best cities for Black millennials, and Austin popped up.
Wow.
I just didn't know that they meant because there were no Black.
It's like unlimited opportunity.
Yeah, I didn't read the fine print. I wasn't prepared for school at the time. That was my extent of research, and I'm from the Midwest, up north. I'm I just want to get somewhere where it's warm and I'll be okay. I figured it out from there, and so came to Austin knowing a little bit about it, but having expectations that were not even close to true. So, but it's an experience, and also it taught me a lot. I'm glad I made the decision, and I wanted to go to a bigger school. I wanted to learn some of these things, but it was real eye-opening for the first couple of months to be like, oh, this is where I'm living now. Okay, and you just have to find ways to adjust. But it was a culture shock, definitely. But that's how I got here.
Well, do you find, I guess that can lead to another question. There's a question that really hovers about the relatively small number of African American, Latino students in the profession, or in the academy and profession. And I guess the first question is that seems to be true.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember a few years ago I was walking from Goldsmith to Sutton, and a student of color stopped me and said, "Are you with the School of Architecture?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, basically it was like reaffirming that there's another one of us." Right? And then, okay, make sure, and I was like, that really stuck with me. And I said, yeah, there's this sense of being sort of both outnumbered or whatever. And it comes to you in waves, right? You discover it in waves, in some surprising and not so surprising ways. But I guess, when you look around your career here, I don't know if you visited other schools or not, but do you have a sense of that minority, and what draws you? I mean, you spoke to what drew you here. Do you think that's a commonality what attracts students of color to planning schools?
Well, I would say I'll go for me and try to extrapolate from there. For me, it was all about kind of the comfort I had coming to the open house. I don't know if Dr. Odin or Dr. Mueller remember this, but having people talk to you and then send you an email, personal email after, you know, for me, I was, you know, moving away from my family at the time, you know, a long way from anyone else, into a field that I knew wouldn't be conducive to what I was used to or my culture or anything like that. So the kind of shock that you feel right away is sometimes off-putting. You get a lot of self-doubt in those times for a lot of people. So having that comfort, and then also the other people in my cohort when I got here, it was like, okay, maybe maybe this won't be bad. Maybe I have a few people that, you know, understand certain differences. And my cohort was, you know, pretty diverse from what I've seen of other cohorts at the time and talking to former students. So that was really good, just as an initial barrier. I don't think we talk enough about like that impact of first getting into a new area and having to do well in school, do well in a new city, but also stuff that doesn't hold your cultural values, and it does weigh on you. It weighs on you a little more than I think we all admit, or if we had to talk about, you would hear some great conversations about how hard it is. And so having that comfort is really what drew me in more than other schools that were kind of just, all right, sign up for your classes, do this.
But it does make a difference. I mean, that cohort is, you know, self-sustaining. It's, it gives you an anchor in that regard. I mean, I remember when I was an undergrad and just the idea of where do you get a haircut if you're an African American.
Yeah.
And you go to like Supercuts and the response is, I'll give it a shot. You know, you kind of go like, no, I think I'm going to find my way to the east side.
Right.
Somehow, right?
I grew a whole afro because I didn't know.
There you go. You know, Miriam, you're in a position, and I don't know, this is sort of speaking to the both culture and the idea of like the responsibility that you have placed or have accepted and embraced, I think. That, do you find yourself as, I guess one word would be mentor, other word would be role model, or do you find yourself in a position where, or do you see opportunity for that now that you've been here for a year?
Yep, this is my second semester here.
So, have you gone to the first wave of culture shock, and now you're...
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I definitely feel like I'm still transitioning a lot of the time because a lot of each organization or institution has its own norms and values. I think I hope that I'm able to serve as a role model to people. I know that mentorship is a very important part of what I hope and try to do. Because when thinking about how people can translate their personal values into the work that they do, there's a lot of connecting the dots that needs to be done, a lot of support that I feel that I can provide by getting them to think like 10 years ahead. What is your dream job? If you believe in racial justice, or if you have these equity values, or if you are a first-generation college student, how do you link your values that you hold, with the career that you want? And a lot of people, in my experience, who come from families where they're first-generation college students, or from communities that have low educational attainment rates, those questions often aren't asked. And so certainly there's a relationship where I try to give a lot, but I also feel like I gain a lot from students. I once heard a quote that you should always have at least one strong mentor who is older than you and one strong mentor who is younger than you. And I feel like I really use young people as signposts for the kinds of conversations that I should be fostering. Because if I'm a person who believes that institutions aren't capturing everything, I can become very righteous. I can get very comfortable with my value add. But when I talk to young people, I realize that I'm not getting the whole picture. So in my classes, for example, I bring in hip hop for sports. These are all topics that are shaping the culture that we're a part of, and ultimately the work in the built environment that we do.
Sure. Well, for a question for both of you, do you sense that, have a sense of what the barriers are to, when we talk about increasing diversity, increasing the population of underrepresented students. Do you have a sense, in either your experiences, of what some of the barriers are for those folks? Or what are some of the barriers for you? There's some that are obvious, but there's probably some that are not so obvious.
Like Miriam and I were just talking about access being something. We talk about, disadvantaged communities, or I think we talk about poverty of individual families. We talk about struggles of individual families. We don't talk about how that limits your barriers to knowing other people in different places. If you're in a segregated area with poverty, extreme poverty, not only about you and your family structure, but do you have the access to the information that you need? So, do you have access to planners and architects? These are not doctors and lawyers. You don't see these careers on TV. You don't see them, on your paper, but they do things. And you have an idea that people do things. Like somebody had to design this building, or make the traffic run this way, or make the trees in the park a certain, type of tree or something. Someone has to do that. But what access do you have to these professions? And, I think my dad worked for the city of Milwaukee, and I think, him working in neighborhood services and code enforcement, I had an added view into how this may work, but I still didn't know what a planner was. So I can't imagine someone without the access that even I had in those same communities, especially where I'm from in Milwaukee, knowing what a planner is or what a planner does. Not even saying I can't do that yet, but even having an idea what this thing is. So for us, like, exposure and access are critical barriers that we don't talk about because it's like an unknown or something. There's no way to know about something you have no connection to. So.
Yeah, I think with that question, I think a lot about the low-hanging fruit. So, I think about my experience. So for me, it was one class that really changed the game. I took one urban planning class that incorporated critical theory with Ananya Roy, who's a giant in the field. And then I started seeing the potential between linking all my interests. And I remember when I was scrolling through the undergraduate urban planning classes, and all the other ones were very technical, engineering oriented, and very transit oriented at the time. And so I feel like there are very easy ways to connect with undergraduates to introduce them to the field. Because it's not, when thinking about that discussion, it's not that people aren't qualified, it's not that there aren't enough undergraduates of color who may think about this career. The onus is really on the institutions to create opportunities for exposure. And then people can decide themselves. But when we think about sheer numbers, certainly at even institutions like UT and other ones, when we think about proportions, Black and Latinx students are very underrepresented. But when you think about sheer numbers, there are thousands and thousands and thousands. So why can't we get 20, right? And so there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there that I think remains untapped. And I'm fortunate to see that discussion being had here about how to increase exposure. Is it a matter of sending some emails? Do we show up to a class? How do we make that happen?
True. And I think you're right. There is a discussion and acts of implementation that are being forecast for the future. And I think you both have been part of those conversations here at the school. Caleb, you're now out in the profession,
Yes.
right? So we can dig a little deep into that. What have you? I don't know. Do you see opportunity within the profession now that you're a quote unquote professional? You're working out of the Metroplex.
Yeah. So I work for Texas Housers. We do housing advocacy, community development, and I'm really thankful for the job because it kind of allowed me to, like we were saying before, keep my values and still do something that I feel like I have an expertise in. So going out to communities, I get to deal with real world problems. I was just in Lubbock and Amarillo, Texas, which is in the Northwest, right by Oklahoma, dealing with, you know, a trailer park community that's unincorporated to a city that's losing their water because their water corporation went defunct, and they have to make a decision between annexation and trying to figure out a way to keep their water and then other services with limited income. So challenging
That sounds
topics,
like a real world problem.
very challenging topics, and you have to have your expertise, also have the value of understanding what people go through, being able to communicate to different types of people that didn't grow up the way you grew up, and provide them with the best professional answer, understanding where their strengths and limitations are. And I think for me, that's kind of the place I wanted to be, struggling in planning school to say, would I ever be able to do these things? Or am I going to have to be in a city office just feeling like Cruella de Vil? You know, and I just be honest, that's sometimes how you feel. Like you feel like I have all these great ideas and values, but this planning textbook is telling me to work in this very, you know, tight, constrained way. And I'm pretty sure in design fields, there's a lot of that too. I'm just really thankful for that opportunity, and it's kind of helped me expand and go, there are ways that I don't have to limit myself. There are ways that I can use my values and my expertise, and it doesn't have to be like what's out there already.
Well, did your academic preparation help you with that? I mean, in the sense of directly engaging communities, because that's the thing, is that it can be a fruitful relationship when you're engaging communities. It can also, if you're not careful, come across as condescending.
Yeah.
That I'm a know-it-all, fresh out of school, and who are you to question what I'm applying my values to you, your situation. So were you prepared for that? And
Yeah. I think it's a major question of like universities and how they bring value. You know, teachers, professors are valued, students themselves are valued, because we all bring in different experiences, and you're with each other a lot, that add into a lot of knowledge that you can get about subjects. So I had some particular knowledge, and I was in classes with people who had experienced other things, and they were to add their expertise to a subject we were talking about. So understanding that value is not just top down or bottom up; it's both of those things, and you need that to have robust discussions. And I was grateful that my cohort, and what we hoped to try to do was create those discussions. And in my opinion, we did. We had a lot of discussions here that I was proud to be a part of, and that definitely helped. Definitely helped me in the next phase.
And I think, Miriam, what you're suggesting also is that part of what you do is to help facilitate that framework for discussion, for those kind of opportunities that really gives the students, again, those opportunities to set a trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, I really encourage the students that I work with to think of their work as not local. Certainly, we have projects that have very local and contextual implications, but in planning, we have what's called policy transfer. So what you're working on is probably being done somewhere else. These ideas are being transferred, we're replicating, we're learning. And that's actually one of the reasons I was so excited to come to Austin is in the Bay Area, I was working with an agency that was experimenting with incorporating racial equity in all its policies and procedures. It was a part of a national network of city governments that are doing this. So there's a move for public agencies to do this, and I was aware that the city of Austin was doing the same thing. And all of the people that are doing this kind of work are meeting and talking at conferences. So there's a lot of scale jumping, I think, in terms of what your personal and professional interactions are. And certainly I have to work hard to build relationships locally. I have a long ways to go to develop those types of personal relationships, but I have a sense of the kind of work that's going on because of the nature of the work itself.
Sure. Well, and so along those lines, you're developing relationships at a number of levels, and you've had prior relationships that you mentioned in the Bay Area, working with various organizations. And Caleb, I know you've done some fair share of conferencing and things of that nature, and you're in a professional relationship now. Do you both see, I guess, is there still, I mean, obviously there's still some underrepresentation. Is it comparable to the academic underrepresentation? Is it remarkably different? Is it, are you optimistic in regards to it's getting better and better? I'm just kind of curious at the professional level, how do you see sort of underrepresentation or not of any people of color?
Sure. So I'm gonna put on my instructor hat on for a second. This semester I'm teaching race in the built environment, and we had a whole module on racialized organizations. So how not only are professional degree programs racialized, but even the inner workings of a given firm or a planning agency is highly racialized, and that happens in different ways. Who's up for promotions? Where are people of color concentrated in a given agency? I encourage students to think about how their own lives are segregated. We're not supposed to say, well, all of my friends are white, but I've had students talk about that, and to talk about that in a professional context. So as you become professionals, what are the implications of something like that in the course of your career? It's certainly still a problem, and we can look at it at a few different levels. At the same time, I'd like to think of our field as inherently optimistic, as inherently forward-thinking. So if a given organization is highly racialized, if people of color, and there have been studies done on this, if people of color tend to be in the external relations roles or in the community engagement roles, how do we make it so that that particular group of people has power? How do we make it so that they are using that a particular agency is using that particular dynamic to not reproduce social inequality in given communities? So it's certainly still a problem. We see it in our personal lives, we see it in our workplaces, but I'm motivated by oftentimes the discipline itself.
Yeah, I think 100% on, the power structures. From what I see, you have, more diversity, but has the decision-making changed? And has that format been altered to accept new ideas? And most of the time, and just in my experience, no. And they're very filler roles. They're roles that don't deal with, the major policies, initiatives, funding, all the things that really structure how you have to work as an organization, as a, institution. Those things have not changed as much, even though you may see more faces for community engagement or the person that, has to do the groundwork. But when it comes down to how that decision is being made, does that same person have the ability to dictate those, life-changing kind of things or organizational changing decisions? And I don't think so. And I think that's something that we have to be cognizant of.
Well, before we open it up to questions, I think, any parting comments or any advice you'd give as a recent grad, besides Googling Austin?
Yeah. Don't Google the places you live. It's not good. I would say there's a couple of things. What you learn here, it's gonna change, and you have a framework. It's gonna be up to you to adapt it. It's gonna be up to you to understand how your values uphold certain things. And when you get out into the next stage, you're going to have to make decisions based on your values, and they're going to be real world decisions. And that's something that in my thought process I was, all right, this is actually going to affect people, and understanding and being centered on what that means for you, and that you always have some kind of control over your values and what you want to do with that is important. Because when you get out of here, you're going to have the tools. things are gonna be, oh yeah, I know what to do with that, but that's not really the issue. Your knowledge base is gonna be great, but understanding where to bend it, where not to, if you want to. If you don't, what kind of planner do you want to be? Who do you want to affect? I think are major decisions that don't get talked about here. And just because who knows what's going to happen. And so be ready for that and understand that you'll be prepared. But the context is everything. So, and don't stress out, jobs take a while. They take some time. So, I know people are going to graduate and are getting ready for that, and the right job is worth the time too. So prepare for that. Don't stress.
Did you have any closing or any comments before we open it up?
Sure. I mean, I think that there's, so in our field, a lot of people do come to it not having been engaged in discussions about diversity or racial equity before. I see it in my class. I actually have several students, this is their first time kind of meaningfully engaging these questions. And there are a lot of different reasons that people ultimately come to that conversation. It could be values. There's a very utilitarian reason to be engaged in these conversations also. And that's that by 2045, more than half of this country will be people of color. So it's about understanding that professionally, we need to develop the skills to engage people who are wildly different than you, who come from a very different walk of life, so that you remain relevant, so that we all remain relevant. And I'm really excited to see the profession headed in that direction. But it's one way that I encourage students to think about it too.
Yeah.
I will say that somehow we got this far without putting Charlton on the spot.
That was planned.
You
That was a plan that you're now subverting.
You should chime in too.
Oh, about what?
Well,
I will say that as long as I've been here, and it's been an on-again, off-again relationship with the school, but there's always been there have been times when there was no cohort for me. And that was a pretty, you don't appreciate the toughness of that time. Things that don't go right, you assume it's really about you, and you don't really sort of weigh in or become aware or cognizant of the factors. I'm from a really rural part of East Texas. That's why I'm being overwhelmed. Well, yeah, that's part of it, but there was also a greater part of it, being really singularly alone, not having sort of either a mentorship structure or just a cohort. And that interestingly enough has repeated itself over time. Like, you move forward X number of years and you see one, oh, that's still sort of the case. You move forward, no, that's still, so it's an optimistic time for me because of the fact that there is a conversation going on, and actually that is moving beyond just conversation, because I've been here through several cycles where there's been conversations, right? I'm sort of sick of conversations, right? And I've told this too, and we've been really frank to a number of students that, as we look at the conversation about, again, curriculum diversity, about our recruiting, about the constituency of the school, and the things that we can look to impact, we don't really deserve your patience anymore. As a school, we don't deserve the patience of students anymore to sort of sit back and wait for things to get better. So I think the fact that there is a lot of student interest in the conversation, there's student-run, the panel discussion next week, the student led by John Chase's legacy in the community of Austin, and the Women in Architecture panel that was student-led. And so I like the fact, and even working with your cohort, right, and being really pushing the envelope and being like really, being pains in the asses about things, that saying, yeah, we're actually not going to be patient about this. At least raise the level of discourse, right? And that has a tremendous amount of value. So that gives me a lot of optimism in regards to where we're going to go. I don't think that you can paint a lot of things with a broad brush of lip service, but I don't think that that's the case here now. It's incremental, but it's positive. So there's that degree of optimism. So we're going to open up for questions at this point for you guys. And again, we thank you for being here and thank you for showing the interest. Any questions for these guys? Sure.
question is, when dealing with your professional career and the things that you guys work on and being the people that you are, how do you constructively deal with someone being empathetic to you just because you're a minority or you're a female, then to transitioning that empathy to actually action? Because there's a lot of times where like, oh, I feel for you, but then they don't do anything or nothing ever comes of it. So how do you constructively turn empathy to action? And then just a part two, because that was an external question. Internal question, when you go back to your own communities and they see that you're trying to make things better, and sometimes that gets an adverse reaction to your own communities, or the families that you come from, or the communities that you come from. So how do you explain to people that are part of that community that you're just trying to make things better and you're not trying to be better than them? You know what I'm saying? So I'm just wondering if you could comment on any of those things that were there. I mean, it's a deep conference, so let's go deep. No, you're 100% correct. I'll start. I think on the second question about how to deal with like family structures or communities, and you coming out and getting a degree that a lot of people around may not have or may not have the knowledge on, even if they do have degrees. Like, this is such a specialized field sometimes that you kind of feel like out on your own, and you're saying things. People are talking about transit, and you're like, no, that's they're talking about design. You're like, no, this is, and it gets difficult because people may be not wanting to hear those things, or not wanting you to seem like you're smarter than everyone or something like that. I think understanding where people are at, and it's a long process. I think dealing with communities, you want to come in and give them the right answer and give them all the tools they need like right away. Like, just listen to me. I know if you just do these 3 things, everything's going to be okay. Or this is the process. You have to understand that it may not be for you to change it immediately. That's going to take a lot of just deep breaths you have to take. Understanding that they may not understand or be willing to accept what you have to say right now. And just go about it and wait for the time, because sometimes it takes time for these conversations to be had. And in the workplace, you're going to deal with that too. You're going to deal with people who definitely are in spaces where you think they care, and they don't. They don't care. And, unfortunate, because they're in a space where they have decisions that they could make. Try not to take all that on yourself. It's hard because you see the problem and want to fix it, but you also have to understand, like, there are many of those type of people out in the world, and getting them to understand the whole scope is something that they did do through being raised as a child and into their professional world. You're not going to change them. So understanding who people are is a very important tactic of your work, and also knowing that you can't change it is one of the things that I'm trying to work on.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I think that particularly for those of us who are first generation college students, which I consider myself, we're navigating wildly different worlds. And I think a lot about not reproducing like oppressive patterns of expertise, right? So if I feel like I've been shut out of certain planning conversations, I have to find a better way to communicate what I know with my loved ones. And so one of the ways in which I do that, I think, is similarly to what you were just saying, is meeting them where they're at, but also seeing their expertise. So growing up, my parents always used bottled water, and I didn't understand why. I would sometimes drink the tap water because I didn't take the time to understand why. And they were being citizen scientists. They knew that water may have been contaminated at different points because of the weather or what have you. And so it's engaging in dialogue. I'd like to think of it as a more dialogical process rather than me bringing anything particularly exceptional. Because what I also know is that my field has been very implicit in reproducing patterns of inequality, right? So I may be bringing solutions, but may also be bringing problems. So I think, I try to think about that a lot. I don't have it down, it's a very complicated process, but think about that a lot. And in terms of your first question on engaging people who may be giving you lip service, you know, not taking your insight seriously, I think it's identifying those who do. And it's more work, you know, it's certainly more work. But it's finding the people who you feel you can trust and who may work with you to do something about the insight that you do have.
Yeah, I think in regards to the first question, you know, particularly in Austin, you know, as a professional, you're going to be often in social situations where you're the minority, and you become like a magnet for people to come to you and to tell you how much they love Obama, or how much they, you know, it's like, oh, you know, Austin is so white, and I'm like, yeah, so are you. What do you do about it? But, you know, so that's like, it used to be I was just sort of like, okay, it's great, it's great that you're empathetic for my plight and stuff, but now I'm getting a little sassy about it, and I'm thinking, you know, I don't have to lose to throw something back at you, and I'm like, oh, Obama, no, I'm Trump, yeah. You know? But I think you develop a radar for intentionalities and who is saying the right things, but their actions are proving otherwise. You know, you can talk to me about how you feel about how horrible gentrification is, and let's go look at your 3,500 square foot house on the east side that's brand new, right? Do you not see a disconnect here? You know, or the fact that, well, this is not a conversation about gentrification because I live in South Austin, not East Austin. Oh, yeah, okay. Right? So there's things where the times when you just bite your tongue, the times when you decide you want to give someone a lesson, right? Then you just develop an intuition about that and have a conversation. You know, I mean, it just takes time to develop that intuition, you know? And it's not just in social settings, it's in professional settings as well. The family conversation is really humbling because, you know, they used to get, when I was just working in a professional setting, they understood that. And they understood you went to college, right? They understood it took you longer to get out than most. No, let's not talk about that part of it. But you're working in a professional setting. And then what they didn't quite get was the transition to the academic world. And that became very nerve-wracking for everyone. And I would come home for a family reunion every July, and I would hear, you still got a job? You still working? You making money? You teaching? Really? You making money? Is that just temporary? You know, so it's humbling because they understand that you've achieved a certain amount, but as soon as you start getting full of yourself, you go back home and it's like, well, that's great, but go cut some wood. So I appreciate the humbling of it, the nature of it, and I appreciate literally going back in time to East Texas, watching my clock spin backwards as I get closer and closer to home, right? And then it just becomes the things that you don't have to deal with. The stresses of living in an urban environment. You don't feel that you're in a minority when you're home. There's that sort of sense of being home that is very special. And the people around you, however, whatever their professions are, whatever their lack of education might be, their family, and they have an understanding that they fully embrace you no matter what your successes and failures and things. So it becomes just a nice check in that regard to your life. Sure.
As faculty of color, I know that a lot of students, what do you want students to know? Because I know that burnout is a big issue for faculty of color because they get a lot more demanded on them that can't be disseminated elsewhere because there's no one else to disseminate it to. So what do you want students to know who are excited about working with you and mentorship, but also want what would you want students to know about that relationship?
Sure. So I'm actually going to start this summer training program for faculty of color, and that's so I can better understand the norms and expectations for faculty at the faculty level, you know, the culture of universities, and one of the big things that they emphasize is you have to learn to say no, right? I have to really learn different ways to communicate it and to manage expectations. And I don't, I definitely think that that's something that I've struggled with in the past. But I also feel like the curriculum is structured so that I'm able to interact with students in a lot of different ways. So I think for me, a big way in which I think I'm going to try to manage my student-faculty relationships is through very concrete work planning and structured projects, whether that be class or PRs or theses. And I'm going to ask my superiors, like, can I put a cap on the number of PRs and theses that I can supervise? And so I think for me anyway, and Charlton, I'm really excited to hear what you have to say, but it's about structuring my time in such a way that I don't burn out. And even then, I'm possibly susceptible to burning out. So it's a constant balance. That said, I love working with students, and I'm excited about the PRs I've been learning about, and I love the students in my class, and so something I'm still working on.
Sure, sounds good. Well, I would just say that I'm not at all interested in you. So that's the first thing. Don't knock on that door. I'm not going to answer the phone. I have email block, things of that nature. I would not do well in that course, actually, because I don't really have an ability to say no for a number of reasons. And the position I'm in lends itself to, it actually gives me the capability of saying I don't have to worry about that because that's part of what I'm charged with as an assistant dean now. So it's tailor-made for that, my desire to not be in a position to have to say no for any of this. It's partially also because there were people who were not of color who actually helped me in my journey here, my trajectory. And there is still sort of that deeply embedded sort of obligation, right, that I have that's not going to go away. But I'm in a better position to not worry about saying no because my teaching load is cut, right? And so I have the ability to focus time on sort of the conversations that we have. The goals are making things better, more streamlined, actually a better experience. And just remembering, I think it's important that I remember the struggles that I had, and so I'm in a position to do something about that. We're interested in students' success. We're also interested, paradoxically, in student failure because we want to know what went awry. We want to know what can be done better. We want to know some students fail and do wonderfully outside of the school, but we need to know that because they've discovered a different path, or they moved on, or they figured out they didn't really want to be here, which is contributing to the sort of failure that's a collateral damage. But we need to do a better job of understanding why students come and go, what makes them successful, where there's so much focus on success and justifiably so. But I'm interested in the struggles as well and what we can do within our capabilities, what can we shore up. To me, on a sidebar, recruiting success doesn't necessarily mean a student is coming here. To me, a student going anywhere and gaining an education, gaining and bettering themselves and bettering their position, they don't have to just come here. If they don't come here and we go, oh, that was strike one. No, where did they land? What are they doing? It could just, not everyone can come here. Well, not everyone should come here. But I often speak to potential students. We've gone to the NOMAS conference before as well. And it's about just making sure that they understand that it's accessible. What's going back to your original point, that there is access. And so I don't really have the luxury of saying no, nor do I want to say no. So I basically saying, bring it on. We can still have conversations. Don't be afraid of burdening me with that because it's a burden I readily accept.
So you talked about pursuing your values in your job.
Yeah.
I know exactly where you're at. Maybe not from a greater perspective, but kind of work. When you look at the organizations that are out there, I can't do that. I do as part of the larger bureaucracies. But at some point, we need those bureaucracies to begin incorporating those values. And so there's kind of a reproduction of that exclusion based on well, I have these values, I'm not gonna go there because they don't have my values, but we want those values to get into there, so. Is there maybe, and I have no idea what the right answer is, how do we get, if so much of the young talent is being driven away from those larger bureaucratic organizations because of their values, how do we get those values into those organizations? Is it at a later time, once we've already made our careers and now we're in demand and we come to them? Or do we have to be insurgents within the organization and try and do it from within?
Well, I don't know if there's a great answer for that. At least I haven't found it. But I will say that you have relationships that you can always build with people. Institutions are people, decision makers are people, and they have connections. And it's up to you to find the people that you feel like you can influence. Something that community organizing taught me is how to build powers, relationships. Are there people that you can influence who will be understanding of the plight that you're trying to fix or the problems that you can solve? Can you find the person that you can work with and do something with the ideas that you do have? You know, I think working in that context and not looking at things as bureaucracies or something like that, looking at it as individual people. All right. Is there a person that you really can talk to on that? I think that may help break down these big Goliaths of, things that we have to deal with in the world. So try to find the people that you believe are susceptible to your message. I think you said that before earlier today. Try to find the people that do agree. And that's going to take a little relationship building and you talking, but that's more tangible than trying to change whole systems as a whole.
I heard that you talked a little bit about Milwaukee and working there.
Yeah.
I recently worked across the river in Minneapolis, and I'm having a hard time understanding the hostility that I experienced there. Part of it is just being the youngest person in the office. You're just always an intern. This is what it is. You do what you're told. So I think there is some ways I'm trying to make peace with that and ways I'm trying to understand what happened. Can you tell me more about Milwaukee, and can you tell me more about what the work environment was like in Milwaukee, and if you perceive that as similar to, I don't know, maybe something I've experienced here in Austin or in Minnesota. I grew up in Minnesota, so I'm having a hard time sort of understanding.
I think when you talk about racial histories, you talk a lot about the South, but no one really pays attention to what happened in the Midwest after the Great Migration and things up there. You really don't talk about segregation is probably worse in the Midwest than it is anywhere else. I know Milwaukee I have my friends and my girlfriend here. My friends live in Milwaukee right now, and we'll tell you, Milwaukee is, when you go other places, you realize how things are designed and the environment which people live in. So in Minneapolis, I imagine I've been there a few times, is the same way. You have a lot of people who have not crossed paths a lot, and you get hit with some abrupt lack of understanding, lack of competency, and it's not a good way that I know to help those things, because you're really dealing with people who have not engaged with different communities, and they're doing experiments on you, basically. Like, oh, I wonder if I say this, is this going to be okay? Trying to figure it out as they go at your expense. I don't know. Finding the ways that you need to communicate and help yourself are important. Find the ways where you're just like, I'm shutting this down. I'm not having these conversations. You have to be very protecting of yourself, and that may come off many different ways. But one thing about the work environment, nobody is going to tell you no. Nobody is going to sit you down and say, I think you're dealing with a lot. If you don't do it, nobody's going to help you. They're going to go about their business. So that's a hard thing to accept, is that you have to take ownership of what you need. Nobody else is going to do it for you.
And you the youngest in your firm or currently?
I don't believe so. I think somebody's younger than me. So I'm one of the youngest, but I don't believe I'm the youngest.
It is a fairly, I guess, demographically, I'm assuming it's not that diverse, but that could be an incorrect assumption.
We're working on it. Put it that way. We're working on it, and we have a Houston office that has much more diverse. I work in a one-person office, so I kind of like do all my dealings by myself. So.
But you also have all the faults of the disadvantages of being by yourself at 4 in the morning. Like the fours.
I have a lot of mirror meetings. So, it works out.
Ma'am.
So, you hear this constantly when you talk about like meetings that one city is like trying to get feedback on a new project or implement a new plan, and it's like, well, we see the same people all the time, and their opinions are really well heard, but they're always the same people who don't really kind of do any fix, or you don't understand maybe what a broader community actually wants to see on that plan. How do you think the city or organizations that partner with the city to gather feedback on upcoming projects like the housing bond or like the next iteration of the transportation bond, like how do you think they can learn from an organization like yours and one of your people are getting better representation in their
That's for everybody. For me.
For you.
well, I guess for you, but
Okay, just making sure. I would say I've dealt with a few community engagement processes since I've been working, and they've been really eye-opening to like how the real world deals with community engagement, and it's pretty poor. I mean, I was in Lubbock, Texas for this, so give you some ideas. Not the most hospitable places for new ideas, but we had a community group, it was the east side of Lubbock, that formed an alliance. The many neighborhoods formed an alliance, try to comment on a comprehensive plan, and basically had all of their ideas circumvented or changed into things that aren't deliverable. And their main thing was because of racialized zoning, they were put in an area that's surrounded by industrial uses. So, you'll wake up in the morning, they have pictures of this cotton gins, or they would have like all this stuff on their, driveways. They have a bunch of cotton from industrial plant or dust, and, people died from asthma or pneumonia or many causes that if you're out there and you're able to see how the wind flows and smell like the manure from cows and things, you can see how somebody gets affected. It's strong. You get out your car, you're like, I'm leaving. I can't do this. But people do it every day. And to get in the community meeting and to see city council work their way around all of these issues and not have anything deliverable, it's one of those realities. I think Austin does a better job of talking about those things and having engagement around it. They just probably had it about 10 years too late, 10, 15 years too late. And so what you get here in Austin, the conversations are much different, even in like a Fort Worth or a Dallas or a Houston. So what you have to understand is like working with communities, finding ways for them to have a powerful voice is a challenge. And you're gonna have great ideas, all the numbers, sketches, maps, and you go up and you still have to deal with people who may have interests that just don't align with yours, or most likely personal reasons. And you deal with that in places like Lubbock, Texas. And so, I was talking before, your skills are never going to be the issue. It's understanding those roadmaps and how to get things done that is really, taxing.
Do you feel like the curriculum and the qualitative methods were prepared you adequately for that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually doing a bus route survey soon, So those refreshers always help, like understanding how to put things together. A lot of what I do, it seems really complicated, like when you're just talking about it, but they start with very simple things. We gotta know what the community wants, so how do you put something together to know what the community wants? So all these tools you're using, and I know everybody wants to go to these new innovative tools, you have to have a tool that's readily accessible by many different type of people. And you have to be able to talk to them about what you learned. So all these new innovative ideas you have about charrettes and planning, it's like, you also have to understand the communities that you want to talk to. And like, are you bringing the things that you like into a space that people don't know what you're talking about, they can't engage with you. So it's like, in school, some of these things like, oh, I know this stuff. Like, I don't have to, why am I talking about it? But in reality, like, it's really basic. There's not very innovative or complex things going on in the city or even with these private planners that I've seen. Very basic things, but it's all about who has the power to make sure this gets done. And so, like, yeah, it helped. And unless you're in like some, you know, rich planning firm doing plans in LA or DC or New York, you're not going to be doing these crazy ideas. You're going to be doing the basic things step by step every time and figuring out better ways to influence the process.
Any other questions? Okay, well, great, thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.